Howdy everyone. Hope everybody's feeling well and ready to learn a few more interesting and fascinating things about art. Today we begin chapter 4, Principles of Design. Although you'll notice on this page of the module right below me here, right below this video, I do have, I'm sorry, I think I have at the top of the page on it, the last definition that we need to cover for chapter 3, elements of form, because I realized I had not given you an actual definition for that. So number 24 on your word list should be the word texture, and we define it simply as the tactile quality of a surface. We already talked about that the last time, the fact that there are two broad categories of texture, real and implied. And examples, of course, are sculpture or, the side of a building. Those are things with real texture. When we talk about drawings and paintings, that's implied texture. Okay, so at this point now, let's move on to chapter 4. Now, you'll notice that I plugged in a short kind of summary of the principles of design for you by an instructor, a teacher by the name of Tessa Davidson, well-known, very popular art teacher. But just so you don't get confused, I realize it's a little confusing, perhaps, because she is speaking from a different textbook, and the name of her class is actually a little different from ours. So in that particular class that she's teaching in that textbook, the design principles are in chapter 5. For us, it's chapter 4. So please don't let that confuse you. But it's so well put together, and it's pretty brief, and it's a great little summary of the design principles. Now, we obviously spent a good bit of time on the elements of form in chapter 3 in our textbook. We had some big categories, talking about light and color and so forth, and even line and shape and space and all that. The design principles, I feel like we can go through much more quickly. A lot of them are sort of common sense. Even the names of them are not necessarily new to you. There's a couple that we want to spend a little more time with. But a couple of things I do want to point out to you. We're going to sort of use that video by Tessa Davidson as far as the order in which we explore these design principles. You'll notice it's a little different than the order in which they appear in our textbook, but it's no big deal. They're basically all the same. She starts out with unity. A few other things I wanted to point out to you that are a little different from these two textbooks, however, so you don't get confused. In our textbook, the design principle that she starts with, which she calls unity, is called unity and variety, basically the same thing. The idea presented in the textbook is that for a work of art to be really effective, there has to be things that unify it, but also there has to be some variety to, obviously, to make it interesting. Then she deals with balance. You want to listen closely to the things she says. In your notes, you definitely want to have the two broad categories of balance, symmetrical and asymmetrical, the two types of balance. The next one she covers is emphasis. In her textbook, it's again slightly different. It's called emphasis and subordination, but it's the same basic idea that an artist generally creates focal points to attract your eye. And then there are less, subordinate points that will attract your eye after you go to the main ones, usually, okay? Now, one thing I like about Davidson's approach is that she separates proportion and scale. For some reason, your textbook groups those two together, but you want to think of them in different ways. Proportion really has to do with how all the parts of fit together into a whole thing. One of the typical examples is human scale. If you're training to be an artist, you want to draw the human body, you would learn the basic principles of human proportion, and maybe you'd want to exaggerate them for your own purpose. I could reference again my wonderful little drawing by my son of the guy swimming underwater, and you know, the proportions of the eyes and the mouth to the head are pretty good. The body is, you know, not so bad. So, you know, you can kind of read that image as to what it is. Scale, it seems kind of similar, but it's a relative size of something when compared to a constant, the relative size of something. And it's a relative term, and hopefully you'll get that from your reading and from the examples that she gives you. The next one she talks about is rhythm. In your textbook, it's called repetition in rhythm. I kind of like that, adding the idea of repetition, because that's really what creates rhythm, almost of any kind, right? If you're talking about music, what creates rhythm is a repetition of notes, right? In art, artists quite often will repeat shapes or colors or tones to create a sense of rhythm. So you can have a visual rhythm that can be almost musical in its own way. One artist who was very much into that idea was a guy named Kandinsky, K-A-N-D-I-N-S-K-Y. You're going to be, I'll give you a little heads up on your assignment today. You're going to be doing a little bit of quick research. You're going to look up a painting by Kandinsky and talk about the idea of rhythm in his painting. And I'll give you a hint. In his mind, his painting his imagery was connected to music in a way. It's no coincidence that there are so many creative people who work in both those areas, visual art and, for example, and music as well. They go hand in hand in a lot of ways. Now, those 6 principles of design are explained pretty well and pretty succinctly in Davidson's video and in the textbook, so you should use both of them. I'm leaving it up to you to scan through that chapter 4 and get that information and let it coincide with the video. Think of the video, Davidson's video, as what it is. It's a summary that gives you a basic idea, and then you go to the textbook and scan through each of those principles and understand it in a little more detail. But you will notice that your textbook includes 2 additional ones, which we do want to talk about, especially since Tessa Davidson did not. One of them is called directional forces, and the other one is called contrast. Now, directional forces is dealt with in your textbook on page 82. So if we flip back to, or over to page 82, we can read real quickly what it has to say. And it says this on page 82, under directional forces. Like emphasis and subordination, directional forces influence the attention we pay to parts of an artwork. But how does it do that? Well, this is an important statement. It says directional forces are paths for the eye to follow, provided by either actual or implied lines. Okay, so directional forces are pathways for the eye that artists create to accomplish that. One great example is on page 279 of your textbook. So if you would, flip over to page 279 and look at this painting by this Renaissance artist from the northern portion of Europe, a country called Flanders, as it was, no longer exists, but in any case, he did this painting called the Hunters in the Snow. Now, this artist, Peter Bruegel, was a master of this design principle, this use of directional forces, okay? Look at this painting and notice how the artist pulls us right into this scene. He has the hunters up on the hill, and they're the closest ones to us, right? Now, our horizon line is often the distance. We can kind of get a sense of. We're up above looking down on everything, including the hunters. And so we see the hunters approaching the village. They're still up on top of the hill. And then our eye drops down the hill and into the middle of the village. And it looks like these big frozen lakes that people are skating on, little tiny images of people. But notice other things, some of the elements he's included that very cleverly bring our eye down to the village. The trees, notice they get smaller and smaller. The one closest to us being the largest one, and we've learned that that's an aspect of linear perspective, right? Objects of the same size appearing smaller the farther away they get. Well, he's using that to pull our eye in that direction. And then also the placement of these black birds in the sky. Look at the one sort of the right, upper right corner of the painting, contrasted against the white snow in the distance. That image of that bird is so important. If you put your thumb over it and cover it up, you may notice that your eye starts jumping around. But that bird helps to focus your eye and brings your eye down to the scene. It can be such a small thing that an artist does to accomplish his or her means. Another painting of his that is really brilliant in that way is I included down below my lecture here, and again it is by this the same artist, Peter Bruegel, but this one is called The Wedding Feast. And again, another just brilliant use of directional forces. Again, these are pathways for the eye created either by, actual lines or implied lines, okay? So when you look at this painting down below us here, the Wedding Feast, notice the guy on the left side of the painting in the red jacket, and the fact that he is looking this direction, not right at us, but toward the fellow that has a red cap and a white apron and is holding the board with the food on it, okay? That figure of the guy with the red jacket on the left side, your eye probably went to him pretty quickly when you first looked at this image. You might have seen the guy that he's looking at in the sort of turquoise top first because he's so big, but your eye at some point probably went back to the fellow in the red jacket. His gaze, the direction he's looking, creates an implied line, a directional force, and your eye follows it. That's one example of an implied line, an invisible line, you might say, that creates a directional force, and that is the gaze of any face. The psychology of the human face is so powerful for us in the human eyes, or the eyes of any animal, that we will tend to look in the direction that the person is looking. So artists make use of that information. So he purposely had that guy in that red jacket looking back this direction so your eye would follow it. And once your eyes come to the guy in the light turquoise jacket and the red cap holding the board with the porridge, whatever that is, your eye probably will flow forward along that. Little scene there with the two guys carrying that big board with these things. You'll notice between them there's a guy reaching down to grab one of them, so your eye may flow along that. There is a use of linear perspective here because the long table with the people on both sides of the table takes our eye back. At some point, your eye will circle around to the left, and you'll notice there's a guy on the far left, almost up against the edge, who's bending over, pouring wine, we might assume, into a mug. And your eye might go to him, and his arm, his left arm coming down that's holding the mug, will bring your eye down, and then your eye will come back to the right, and you'll see this little guy sitting there. Maybe he stole one of the cakes or whatever it is that they're eating. You might not have noticed him at first, but the artist is creating these lines, both real and implied, to bring your eye to where he wants it to be. We already talked about the powerful way that Leonardo da Vinci used that in The Last Supper, right? How he created those real and implied lines that were the converging perspective lines in that painting, The Last Supper, to bring your eyes right to the face of Jesus, right? Again, that's directional forces, okay? Hard at work. So artists are controlling our eyes more than we even realize when they really know what they're doing. Okay, so that's directional forces. They're really interesting and fascinating design principle, and one well worth noting. Okay, and then the 8th one, the other additional one that is in the textbook but not in the Davidson video, is contrast. Okay, and if you flip over to page 84, you will get a nice little definition or description of contrast. Okay, so let's read on page 84 together, just the first couple of paragraphs. Okay, I should brush my hair before I do this. Huh? What little I have, but anyhow. Okay, page 84. Contrast is the juxtaposition of strongly dissimilar elements. Dramatic effects can be produced when dark is set against light, large against small, bright colors against dull colors. Without contrast, visual experience would be monotonous, wouldn't it though? Contrast can be seen in the thick and thin areas of a single brushstroke. It can also be seen in the juxtaposition of regular geometric and irregular organic shapes, or in hard or sharp and soft or blurred edges. Contrast can provide visual interest, emphasize a point, and help to express content, okay? So contrast can apply to many things. The examples I gave you below, you'll notice a photograph of two persons' hair, two persons sitting close together and their hair intertwining, so we have a contrast in value, dark and light. The second one, little baby's foot, isn't that cute? Little baby's foot and adult's hand, and so we have a contrast in scale there, right? The third one is an example of contrast of patterns that can make an image really kind of jump out at you. So those are just a few examples of the use of contrast in art as a design principle. Okay, so like I say, make sure that you've listened to the Davidson summary of the design principles real well, and that you read over in your textbook over these same principles. You can scan the information fairly quickly. It's not a huge amount of work to do, I don't think, and hopefully will give you some enjoyment. And then we will continue with, and of course, don't forget to go to the discussion page. We'll talk a little bit about some related issue, and then of course the assignment for the day. Tomorrow, I'm not assigning any additional reading. Tomorrow's the last day before the test. So tomorrow we will go over the study guide together, okay? So hopefully that's all the information you need right now to get you going and getting to where you feel very secure about all this information, okay? So on to the other parts of the module, and have a great day. Talk to you soon. Ciao for now.